Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera, where today's video is going to be explaining the difference between different types of TLR or twin lens reflex cameras. In recent years, TLR photography has made something of a resurgence. A lot of people are interested in it, and in my online stores, I've been selling a lot of these cameras, and people from around the world seem very, I guess, interested in TLR photography and medium format photography, and it's quite an interesting phenomenon. And for these people who buy these cameras or are thinking of buying them, I thought that I would make this video to describe the differences in how these cameras are designed and how they work. And for those of you who have purchased cameras from my store or stores or are thinking about doing it, you'll find some useful information here about how these cameras operate. For those of you who are new to my channel, I sell vintage Japanese cameras. Of course, these two here aren't Japanese, but most of the ones I sell are. I sell them in my online store, which is japanvintagecamera.com. I have an Etsy store, which is also called Japan Vintage Camera. So if you'd like to buy a vintage Japanese camera or TLR camera, please visit one of my stores. I'll post links to my stores in the description below the video. So, what is a TLR camera? And I suppose that's the first thing which I should cover before I start describing the differences. A TLR camera is a twin lens reflex camera, and as you can see, this camera has two lenses. The bottom has a taking lens, which is the lens which takes the photograph and it projects the image onto the film. And on the top we have what is called a viewing lens. And when you lift up the focusing hood, you look through the top here, through the focusing screen, and a mirror reflects through the viewing lens, and what you see through the viewing lens is projected onto the focusing screen, and it's exactly what the taking lens is seeing when it's looking at your subject. It's quite a simple system which removes a lot of the moving parts which you can find in things like the cameras like the Pentax 67 or Hasselblad or whatever. You have the same high quality lens, you have the same film format, but you have a much simpler design with much less vibration in the mechanism, which allows you to take a sharper photograph. And also these cameras are quite compact and quite lightweight, which makes them a quite wonderful tool for shooting in larger formats. And larger formats like the 6x6 and sometimes 6x4.5, these cameras are sometimes available in variable formats. You get a very high resolution image with a lot of sharpness and detail and a lot of dynamic range. And it's quite amazing the quality of the photographs you can get with a camera like one of these. So I'm going to basically explain the operating system of this rolleiflex first. I did make an entire video about this camera, so this video, or this part, won't be very long. I'm just going to cover the basic fundamentals. For the operating system of the camera and the other ones, we have that's where the differences lie, is in the operating system for the most part. We have a system for changing the shutter speed. We have a system for changing the aperture. We have a system for winding the film. We have a system for focusing the camera, and we have a system for releasing the shutter and taking a photograph. Now basically, the rolleiflex, and this is the 2.8F model, which now there's a G version, which has been around for a few years, but before the G version came out, the F was pretty much the top of the line, and was the most refined and most modern of TLR cameras. If you look at the top here, you can kind of see everything you need to operate the camera. You have the light meter here, and this is the only camera I'm going to be showing which has a light meter. You have the aperture and shutter settings window here, and of course you have the focusing hood and screen on the top. The good thing about this camera is when you are setting the shutter and aperture speeds, you can actually see the numbers change here in the window. And what's convenient about this is you can see them as you are looking through the focusing hood on the top. You just move your eye a little bit forward and you can see what the settings are. This is a wonderfully convenient system, and it makes the camera kind of faster and easier to operate. Consequence of faster and more convenient usually means added complexity, and added complexity often adds up to lower reliability. Fortunately, the rolleiflex camera is a very highly refined machine made to very high quality standards, and very rarely suffers from reliability problems. Unfortunately, that's not the case in most other cameras, and I'll explain that as we go through the video. So basically, this is where you set the shutter speed, set the aperture, wind the film, and charge the shutter, and this is how you take the photograph. You just push the button here. Now, if I compare this to the old rolleicord here, which is a much more primitive design, the system is very much different. First, we have the focusing knob here on the left side on the rolleiflex, which allows you to use your right hand for taking the photograph and adjusting the aperture and such, or excuse me, the shutter speed. On the rolleicord, it's on the opposite side. The focusing is on the right side. And instead of having a combined film winding and shutter charging system, you have to charge the shutter manually by pulling this lever over on the bottom. And there's no shutter release button. To release the shutter, you have to push the lever the opposite way. So it's a much different system than the newer rolleiflex. And then the controls for the shutter and aperture are also different. This camera doesn't feature the dials on the front for making these adjustments. You have to move these levers up and down. And in order to see what the exposures are, you have little windows here on either side that you can look through. And one of the positive things about this camera is that if you're looking from the top, if you turn it just a little bit, you can see what the settings are without actually having to turn the camera and look at the front. And that's a wonderful convenience. Another feature this camera has, similar to the rolleiflex, is a mechanical film counting system. However, this camera is not, as I said, as refined as the rolleiflex, and so these cameras often have issues with the film counter not working properly. Other than that, it's basically the same camera. And of course, it doesn't have the sophisticated lens as the planar lens on my 2.8F, but it's still a very high quality lens. And this is a camera like this, despite its primitive design and primitive appearance, it's capable of taking very high quality and high resolution photographs. So, another camera which is quite popular in my stores is the Yashicaflex, and the one which I usually sell the most of is the Yashicaflex A. I sell this camera because this is the most reliable of the Yashicaflex designs. The Yashicaflex C and the regular Yashicaflex, the A, which doesn't have an A on the top, which has a mechanical film counter, these have a flaw in the focusing mechanism. There's a design flaw, and it uses a set of pushers and springs and a pair of cams which push the focusing standard in and out on the front of the camera, and this causes the one side to push out while the other won't, and it can happen on either side. It's an incredibly difficult thing to fix, so rather than bother with it, I simply don't sell cameras which have that system, and I just sell the ones with the more simple and reliable system. And that way, I don't have to worry about getting a faulty camera, and for those of you who buy one of these from me, you don't have to worry about failing in the future. The operating system in this camera is once again different from the previous two cameras. This camera features a shutter which is shared with a lot of other different cameras of this era, the 1950s. This is a what is called a leaf shutter, and this shutter can be used with a variety of different designs. This was very popular in 35mm rangefinder cameras. On the one side here we have a lever which you use to select the aperture, and we have a ring here which you use to select the shutter speed. We have a separate shutter charging and shutter release system, which is also separate from the winding mechanism. So the rolleiflex has basically one step less in operating the camera because winding the film charges the shutter. This one here adds an extra step, but it greatly reduces the complication of the camera and increases its reliability. I love this design because it's very simple, it's very easy to understand, and there's very little which can go wrong with it. The only thing which you have to be careful with of this camera is the shutter release button. Be careful not to drop these cameras, because when they do, they always seem to land on the shutter release button, which causes it to bend and distort and stick. And I hate when that happens. It's difficult to fix, not super difficult, but be careful not to drop the camera. Try to get a strap when you carry your TLR camera, and always use the strap. Be careful carrying it in your hands, and be careful when you are attaching it or taking it off a tripod. That seems to be the time when cameras are most frequently dropped. So It's a good idea to use a tripod, especially with one of these cameras which is capable of taking a really high resolution photo. You can use a low shutter speed and a small aperture, take a really long exposure and get the most detail out of your image, but it's also quite adequate for street photography, which seems to be what most people are interested in nowadays with TLR cameras. So moving on to yet another design, I thought I would talk about, let's talk about the Ricohflex here, the simple Ricohflex, the Ricohflex model series. This one says Model 7. There are Model 3s, Model 4s, Model 6s, 7s. There's one which is called the Million. There's the 7S, the Holiday. Ricoh made a whole lot of these cameras. And it's really weird because even though they have different model numbers, you can find a lot of different features in a single model series. Like this is a Ricohflex Model 7, and there are at least 3 different shutters available. 3 different shutter designs available for the Ricoh 7. This particular one is a kind of funky hybrid kind of shutter. Some feature a shutter system very similar to the yashicaflex. You have a separate shutter charging lever and then a button for releasing the shutter, whereas this one here features a combined shutter charging and release system like the old rolleicord. But this camera features a full range of shutter speeds from bulb in 1 second up to 1/500th of a second, whereas most of the Ricoh 7s have a bulb in 1/4 of a second up to a 1/100 or 1/200 shutter speed, and some of them have 1/300 shutter speed. So yeah, for collectors, these are really cool cameras because there are so many different varieties. You can, if you collect the full range of Ricohflex cameras, you're going to end up with a shelf full of these things. This happens to be the most popular TLR camera which I sell, largely because it's the simplest and the least expensive. It's also the most rugged and most reliable and the least likely to have issues further down the road. Basically, it's a stamped steel metal box with a mirror inside. There's almost nothing which can go wrong with this camera. The focusing system is incredibly simple. It just uses a pair of helicoids which are engaged by gears around the focusing knob. And there's a simple film counter system on the back where you look at the numbers on the film. It's a really wonderful, simple camera. And despite its simplicity, it's a wonderful design in the lens, and it takes really wonderful photographs. So this is really the best value you'll find in a twin lens reflex camera. Cameras like the yashicaflex here, these are higher quality and a little bit smoother to operate, and some people think they look better, but the simple Ricohflex, there's really not much you can go wrong with when you're if you want a TLR camera and you want to save some money. This is the one to get. As I said, it's incredibly simple. We have the same operating system as on the yashicaflex. We have the aperture knob here within the setting numbers are on the side, and we have the same ring here. And oddly, despite the fact that this is a less expensive and more primitive camera, this one actually offers a larger variety of shutter speeds than my yashicaflex here. So kind of a quirky thing. It's really a good camera, and I guess that's all the best you can say about something is that it's really good. Ricohflex, after bringing out the original Ricohflexes, the cameras eventually evolved into more complicated and more professional looking cameras with more features. And these culminated in what is called the Ricohflex Diamond series, or Dia for short, which is what they are called here in Japan. These cameras feature added things like a parallax correction inside the focusing. They have a window here located on the top, which you can use to check your aperture and shutter speed, just like the rolleiflex 2.8F. We have the same system of levers here instead of the knobs, which we have on the rolleiflex, but this works just as well. And these levers are actually a little bit easier to use. They require less pressure. That's a good thing and a bad thing, because it's kind of, you might accidentally push the lever one way or the other when you are charging the shutter or something like that. There's a self-timer on this camera, which is a good feature, though I recommend not using it because that's kind of the weak link in these cameras. It has the identical operating system to the yashicaflex. It has the separate shutter charging system and shutter release button. And the focusing system is different on this camera. It has kind of these airplane wings focusing levers on either side, which you can use if you're right or left-handed. And this is a very reliable focusing system, very simple to use, and it removes some of the complication from the camera. And I find that this is probably the most reliable and the smoothest focusing system on twin lens reflex cameras. I sell quite a few of these on my online stores when I can get them. These have become more popular here in Japan as well, and good examples are very popular with photographers here, so I can't find them as cheaply as I used to. But I think I have at least one of these available right now. A really good camera. One weakness to this camera you have to keep in mind is the film counting system. When you are checking out one of these cameras, wind the film and make sure that it stops at each exposure and that it works properly. Sometimes it just winds on and the numbers keep going. It doesn't lock like it should, and that makes the camera very hard to use. It's possible to use it, but I don't recommend it. If it has that issue, just avoid buying it. Other than that, this is a remarkably reliable camera. The last camera I want to talk about is one which is very popular for the last decade or so among TLR photographers, and that is the Minoltacord. And there were a whole bunch of these Minolta TLRs put out on the market with a variety of different features. Some of them become nearly as expensive as rolleiflexes, the auto cord with the CDS light meter on the top. These are very, very popular, largely because of the quality of the lenses. These Minoltacords came with wonderful lenses, and a lot of them are, they say they are superior to the TLR lenses, which come in the rolleicords, and rival the planar or Xenotar lenses, which come in the later model, ungodly expensive rolleiflexes. So they're an incredibly good value. You get really high quality images out of these cameras for a much lower price than a later model rolleiflex. But there are some issues with these cameras which you have to be aware of. And the one which is the biggest problem with these cameras is the focusing system. You can see this camera has a focusing knob on the bottom. It makes this funny sound that first time anyway. There it goes. And this is the weak link to this camera, and it's almost a fatal weak link. The issue with this camera is that with a lot of focusing helicoids and lenses in old cameras, they sometimes seize. And you can unseize them if you disassemble the camera and clean out the metal shavings and stuff, which cause the focusing helicoid to stick. But the problem with these is that some people force the focusing lever here and it breaks off. And the problem with this is that this focusing lever, the mechanism is made out of like a hard die-cast zinc. It's not made out of brass or steel or aluminum. And the issue is that the zinc is pretty much unrepairable. You can't solder it back together. You can't super glue it. You can't put JB weld on it. When it breaks, it's broken. And the only thing you can do is replace the mechanism. And the cost of replacing the mechanism is higher than the cost of just replacing the camera. So what I recommend with these cameras is if you get one which is working smoothly, you should lubricate the focusing helicoid so it doesn't start sticking and seize up in the future. And you can do that on this camera and the Ricohflex camera here. If you remove these 4 screws on the focusing hood and lift it up, you'll be able to see the taking lens, the back side of the taking lens. And if you focus the camera out to the close focusing setting, it will open up a gap underneath the lens. And if you look underneath the lens, you'll be able to see the focusing helicoid. Now you can reach in with a syringe and put a few drops of oil on the focusing helicoid, and that will, if the camera's not focusing very smoothly or it's making noises like this one was, that will usually solve the problem, and it will also put off the helicoid seizing, and it should make the focusing a little bit less, I guess, less effort to do it. I really recommend this if you have one of these where the focusing helicoid is still not sticking, and and especially if it's starting to get a little bit stiff like this one is, you should lubricate it as quickly as possible so it doesn't seize and brick your camera. And as I said, you can do that both on the Ricohflex and the Minoltacord or Minoltaflex cameras or auto cord cameras. They all use the same basic. Minoltaflex uses a focusing knob. The Minoltacord uses this system on the bottom. So yeah, lubricate it if you can, if it's still working. This camera here is one of the, numerous variations of the Minoltacord. Some of them have a more modern operating system, very much similar to this Ricohflex here. This one here, of course, has once again, the aperture lever on the other side, and it has an aperture lever on this side, very similar to the Ricohflex camera. This one has a kind of quirky shutter release system. This one has a film winder on the side with a mechanical film counter, but it's not combined with the shutter charging lever. Some of the later models have the combined system. Other than the focusing helicoid, this is a really wonderful camera, and if you find one which focuses smoothly and doesn't have a damaged focusing lever on the bottom, I would recommend buying it if you can get a good price on it, and you'll be able to take some really wonderful photographs. But anyway, this video has gotten to be more than 20 minutes long now, and I hope that this video might have answered some questions you have about the differences in the operation of TLR cameras. And if you have one of these, maybe you learned a little bit something about it. If you have any comments or suggestions or other information about these cameras, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I've got a couple of more videos in the works. I should have one out after the weekend and one out before next weekend. If you'd like to see these, please subscribe or check back. If you like the video, please click the like button. And thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.